On today's episode of Future Says, we have Katherine Sizov, founder and CEO of Strella. So Katherine, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Strella?
Sounds good. My name is Katherine. I graduated with a degree in molecular biology from the University of Pennsylvania. And then I read that 40% of food is wasted before it's consumed. And I thought it was a number that just doesn't make sense in today's world. So kind of set out to discover why that happens and build a solution towards it. So founded Strella. What we do is we predict the shelf life of different fruits and vegetables, and then we use that data to optimize inventory all across the supply chain.
Okay, wow. And how do you do that predictive analytics? Are you leveraging machine learning?
Yeah, so we leverage machine learning in certain applications. In other places, we basically have a sensor technology that measures different gases that fruits and vegetables produce. And then based on these gas profiles and emissions, we can predict where along the maturation the fruit or vegetable is. And so then we basically build a apple algorithm or banana algorithm that can tell us what the expiration date looks like.
Okay, so each fruit requires a different type of algorithm. Are some fruits harder than other fruits?
Yes, so like kiwis are like the gold standard because they're super challenging. They produce very little and they're really sensitive.
And why has this been such a big issue? What are the traditional approaches to looking at fruit, looking at the ripeness of it that had not been working?
Yeah, so generally speaking, in the food chain, there's just a lack of quantifiable data in general. So we rely on folks with a lot of knowledge and expertise to make decisions. And at the end of the day, what happens is a lot of inconsistency, a lot of inefficiency, and these people are really overloaded. And so a lot of what we do is making sure that we can pass things along from one person to the other and lighten the load for people that are key to making certain decisions around perishability.
Okay. And how is life as a founder? Is it busy?
Very busy, very challenging, definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but I think rewarding. I think, part of living a fulfilling life is doing the challenging things that are worth doing.
Yeah, and you just mentioned off camera as well that it's great that you love what you're doing because you talk a lot about it, and it's very good to be so enthusiastic about something that you talk about a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if I didn't like what I was doing, I would have burned out a long time ago.
Yeah. Amazing. So tell us about that ultimate goal. So you said you were inspired by 40%. What do you want to bring to the fruit and veg market? What's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, so I think the kind of two issues that we're looking to tackle are one, that there's a lack of data in the chain, so bringing some more information through sensors and technology. And then the second piece is that right now the supply chain is really siloed. So we're basically playing a giant game of hot potato with produce. And as a result, it's really inefficient. So we want to be like the guardian angels for perishable products as they move from hand to hand, making sure that the right decision is made all across the board.
Okay, so talk to us about the sensors themselves then. What do the sensors look like? How big are they? Where are they sitting?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of our standard one is a little sensor the size of about a brick. We place it in areas where things are ripening and maturing. So for example, fun fact, an apple in a grocery store can be over a year old by the time it gets there. And so it sits in storage for a really, really long time. And so we put sensors inside storage rooms, and then we gather all this data about the life of the apple while it's been in that storage room. And then we can use that to inform decisions on the retail level and on the supplier level. So sensors can be dispersed basically anywhere they need to be. We put them in ripening rooms where bananas go from green to yellow. We can put them on trucks and shipping containers. But basically these sensors measure the secret communications between fruits and vegetables. So if you've ever put an unripe banana next to a ripe one, you see that ripens faster than if it was by itself. And this is because plants talk to each other as they're ripening. And so our sensor technology basically intercepts these signals and is able to tell what the fruit is telling us.
That's amazing.
Thank you. It took a lot of work by people that are a lot smarter than me, so I'm glad to have a good team.
Tell us about that team. Who's in the company?
Yeah, so I'd say we're fairly nerdy. So we have a healthy mix of electrochemists, biochemists. We've got developers on our team, obviously. We've got mechanical engineers, electrical engineers that work on building out the technology. And then we have a beautiful commercial team that helps support our commercial efforts.
Okay, amazing. And so for that development team, you have this hardware, you're taking in different data. Can you go into what exact data you're looking at here to make these decisions?
Yeah, for sure. So a big one is ethylene gas, which is a hormone that's produced by plants as they begin to ripen. It's kind of the first indicator of maturity. So before you see an apple changing color or changing in sugars or starches or even its firmness, it's going to be producing this gas, ethylene. And so because it's a proactive indicator of future quality, it's a really awesome place to start when you're looking at maturity and trying to make decisions before the produce starts to go bad.
Amazing. And the other big thing was around the supply chain. So tell us about some of the disruption in that area.
Yeah, I think in general, the way that players currently work within the chain is they kind of hand it off to the next guy, and there's not really anyone making sure that at the end of the day the customer is getting a good experience, right? So that experience is segmented between the retailer, it's segmented between the supplier, and as a result, there's kind of no one entity overseeing the entire journey and the entire process. And so sometimes what happens is that individual supply chain players will make decisions that make sense within their kind of area of expertise, but might not make sense on the whole. Another simpler way of putting it is, let's take Walmart, for example. They're not exactly experts in apples or bananas. And so sometimes it can be hard for them to make the right decision for that particular SKU. And so our goal is to kind of be the experts and help everybody along the chain make a better decision about specific produce types.
Okay. So do you interact a lot, obviously, with the retailers, but also with the farmers?
Yeah, so we work both with suppliers. So typically we work one step above, so post-harvest basically. And then we also work with retailers.
Okay. Of course, farmers must be delighted. When you talk about artificial intelligence and automation, sometimes I think people are concerned about it taking jobs and retailing jobs, let's say. Does that come up a lot? Do you have those types of concerns?
I think our biggest thing is to be kind of an aid and a help. So a lot of the people that we work with are working incredibly challenging jobs and very long hours and are already extremely overstretched. And so when we start talking about optimization and efficiency, it's usually kind of a conversation of, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if you got to see your kids a little bit more, instead of like we're replacing the job. I look at what we do as a partnership with the people within the chain. There's a ton of knowledge, experience. A lot of the people that we work with can be like 8th generation growers. And so obviously they have a ton of experience and we're here to be a tool in their toolbox.
And are all those conversations easy, or is there some resistance to change sometimes?
Definitely not all easy. I mean, agriculture is a little bit known for being a little bit slow moving and archaic. So definitely like for a startup and new technology, it can be difficult to have adoption. We're also enterprise B2B. So in general, we deal with large entities and slow moving businesses. That being said, I just love my industry because I feel like everybody's working on something real, right? Like it's food, it's something that everybody interacts with, and everyone is very hardworking. And honestly, like from a morals and like what matters perspective, I find a ton of alignment, with folks like farmers.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. On this podcast, we speak to lots of people in lots of different industries and lots of different companies. And some are relevant to some people, some are relevant to other people. But I think food, we could safely say, is relevant to everybody out there. So everybody should be interested in this type of conversation. So what would be your advice to my mother or somebody in Las Vegas or somebody in Europe who's going to the retailer, the supermarket tomorrow? And what's your advice to them? What should they be thinking about?
I guess I can give a couple of tips. So on the banana side, if you notice on the stand, there's sometimes individual bananas. So those guys tend to get thrown away first. So if you want to prevent food waste, then pick up the individual bananas on the shelf. Another thing is that you can use one fruit to ripen another. So I'm sure some of you guys know this, but if you put like a ripe tomato next to a green avocado, then that will ripen the avocado. So that's a way to do it. I think in general, at Strella, what we're trying to do is to create a lot more consistency so that every time you go to the grocery store, the avocado will last exactly 3 days, for example. So that way consumers don't have to throw out as much because especially the avocado example, I feel like I go to the grocery store, I buy 5, and I only really end up eating 2 of them because they're so all over the place.
Yeah. So with your algorithms then, when you've decided how ripe they are, what are supermarkets or retailers doing as a result?
Yeah, so sometimes it's just like a very basic reshuffling or triage. So right now, the whole supply chain, for the most part, moves first in, first out without looking at maturity. So what we'll do is we'll kind of reshuffle the order and make sure that the most mature apple is always getting shipped to the grocery store first. And then we also kind of do an automated quality check. So we are able to say, hey, if it takes, this retailer 20 days on average to sell an apple, we'll make sure we're directing apples with that 20 days of shelf life to the retailer in advance of it even getting to the retailer.
Okay, so very technology driven, very precise technology you're using. What are some of the challenges that you have on the technology basis, on the tech side?
Well, the hardware is mostly developed. So the big thing that we're working on is building out a little algorithm for each type of produce.
Yep.
And so that, especially on the machine learning side, can either require like a significant amount of data, both in the field and in our facilities, in our R&D facilities. So that is always a challenge. I think in general, we're a fairly new company. So just learning how to properly build models and do it efficiently has always been a challenge. Yeah, I'd say those are kind of the big pieces for us, is grabbing as much data as possible in as short a period of time.
Mm-hmm. And what's the vision for Strella, let's say, in 5 years' time?
Yeah, so we basically work with these big companies, like big retailers, and so what we want to do is be their data provider for all things food. So we start with perishability. We're starting to kind of delve into demand forecasting and demand planning, visibility and transparency on KPIs. So how do I even know if I'm doing a good job with my bananas? And basically working with the retailer to improve their whole entire produce aisle. I think all of us as consumers can understand that the produce section is one of the most sensitive parts of the store, right? A lot of people pick their grocery store for the avocados or for the bananas. And so nailing down that category in retail is pretty key.
Mm-hmm. So avocado, bananas, you mentioned kiwis. Do you want to stay within that food section, within that fruits, or is it very much going to even to clothing or anything like that? Or are you staying within the perishable foods firstly, moving to other foods after?
Yeah, for now, starting with perishables, so starting in the produce section just because it's a huge problem on the food waste side, and then probably moving into like a meat and seafood category, and then who knows what happens next. I feel like at that point we'll be pretty big and maybe even getting to like building ERPs and things like that might be more generic. But for now, I think there's a very significant amount of market potential just in this particular space.
Yeah, exciting times. And like you said, I mean, the existing state of affairs being 40% of food being wasted is not good enough. That needs to change. So something has to happen in this space. With the agricultural space in general, with smart farming in general, can you talk to us a little bit more about other trends in this space? What you're seeing at conferences, what you're seeing from your partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the number one issue in ag is labor. So it's a really significant cost. It's challenging on all number of different fronts. So we're seeing a lot of automation in that space. So like robotic picking, harvesting, a lot of automation in the packing line and further. So like putting things into boxes, for example, etc. Sorting, new sorting methods. We're seeing a lot of venture capital put into indoor farming, which seems to be something that requires a significant amount of capital investment to make it into the future, and certainly a very promising direction. Trying to think what else.
Reading recently about vertical farming as well, and there was a big startup in Europe called Infarm, which is struggling quite a lot at the moment. Is that something you see?
Yeah, I think vertical farming has been struggling. Like, there have been a number of companies that have died in the last year or two. It's definitely expensive and is very capital intensive to start up. So I think that's kind of the challenge that one faces when in a slightly lower market than we are right now.
Yeah. Is enough being done by governments around the world to prioritize investment in these areas, which are so critical to all of us citizens?
I don't think so. I think COVID kind of showed that like the grocery stores are empty, the shelves are bare, right? So, and I think that was kind of eye opening for a lot of people, like realizing that this is not something that we should just take for granted. So I definitely think that the government could play a bigger role. But that being said, sometimes that's a double-edged sword, right? Like in the U.S., we've seen a lot of subsidization of like commodity crops like corn and soy, and so the question is like, is that in the long run the right answer as opposed to just like a competitive system? I don't know. I could hypothesize about that, but I think in general, a bit more government intervention would be critical, especially as farming becomes less and less profitable. We're seeing a ton of aggregation, consolidation. So we used to speak to people who owned the farms for generations, and now we're speaking to Goldman Sachs. And I would say that probably for humanity, that might not be the best trend. I think it's better to keep farms in the hands of those who know how to keep them.
Yeah, it's talking about hypothesizing. You're no longer Catherine. You're now the Minister for Agriculture in the US or in some country in Europe. What is your first policy change?
I would probably make improvements around labor. So kind of having some, and I would do my market research first before anything came out of my mouth, but basically figuring out how to solve some of these labor issues, because I think a lot of farms and a lot of businesses in ag right now are going out of business because we're having a labor crisis in America.
Yeah, labor. We have somebody else on the podcast who has created an autonomous vehicle for construction sites as well, because there's a big labor shortage there, which goes around and can do different jobs without having to rely on labor where there's this big shortage.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So artificial intelligence, is that the key then? Is what you're building the key to solving things in labor shortages and the ripeness of fruit and in things outside of food, everything else? Do you think AI is a really huge key here?
I think it's part of the solution. I think as with all big problems, you unfortunately have to attack it from a lot of different angles, and there's no real silver bullet. Because I'm more of a hardware person, I always love the kind of like, robotics and sensors and novel technologies as opposed to maybe approaches to data science. So, I mean, I think AI is certainly an important piece, and I think doing good data science and gathering good data sets is always critical, but has been like since the 70s.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about, how passionately you're talking about it, and the fact that the agricultural and farming sector needs such radical change. We need more innovators like you, Catherine. So how would you inspire the next generation? What tips for people out there do you have who are thinking, yeah, you're right, maybe it's not 40% in this area, but there's another area that needs more optimization. I'm going to set up my own company. What advice do you have?
I would say just do it. Life is short. I've learned a ton. I don't feel like I just feel like just from if you look at it selfishly from an internal development standpoint, it's so important. You're going to learn so much. I think a lot of people put things off and they say, maybe later, maybe when I have a bit more experience, maybe when I'm a little more settled down and stuff. And I think my advice would be, if your heart is telling you to do something, I would follow it. That's a very non-scientific answer from a person with a scientific background, but it's always served me well.
Yeah. Would you agree with the term, sort of fail fast, learn fast? Have you made mistakes where you've learned from over the last couple of years setting up this company? And could you tell us some of them if you have?
Yeah, I make mistakes on basically hourly basis.
Yeah.
That's like one of the hard things, is it's a very humbling job.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've made like every freaking mistake in the book. I obviously am not a CEO, I wasn't before this. So learning how to manage people, I'd say people are the hardest and most beautiful part of the job always. So tons of mistakes there and lessons learned. I think it's like a fine balance between following your own voice, right? So having the vision, because that's what you're there for, but also taking in the right amount of feedback and kind of listening to what everyone has to say around you. So that's a big challenge, and made all sorts of mistakes in all different directions there. Everything from, nitty gritty like sales, how do we price things, how do we go to customers, to fundraising, like screwing over rounds and things like that. Basically every mistake in the book has been made. Yes.
Talking about the first one around management styles, you've such a diverse company with so many different backgrounds and people and regions and cities within the US. How do you keep them all motivated and enthusiastic when there are bad days, as there always is?
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly something that I think about a lot. I think part of it is I like to hire mission-oriented people. So obviously things like finances and stuff are important, and I make sure that everyone feels comfortable so that they can focus on their job. But that being said, I think everyone on my team is kind of looking for something a little bit deeper than just a job. So that's kind of part of the hiring process. How else do we keep people motivated? I think there is a little bit of a magic that comes with a small team, right? So in person is actually pretty important to me in general. I like people interacting and talking between each other on a daily basis. I think everyone is very intelligent and pretty autonomous, and so there's a big deal of respect between everybody. So there might be the electrochemistry folks might know a lot about sensors, and so we trust them to do that. But we also trust the devs to do their job as well.
Amazing. So we're 2024. What is the big objective if we had this discussion at the start of 2026?
So what am I?
You're getting about 18 months, let's say.
Okay, and so I'm like, I've done everything I ever wanted to. Probably go on vacation. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But apart from that, company goals, I would say expansion into more geographies and more commodities.
Okay.
So hopefully by 2026, we're in all of the kind of big ones that we think about: the avocados, the tomatoes, the stone fruit, peaches, pears, nectarines, everything that we throw away that we don't like throwing away, that we're in, and also have a strong geographic presence with a strong reputation associated with it.
Okay. Talking about that geographic presence, does each country, each region offer different challenges within this type of environment?
A little bit, for sure. There are definitely just cultural differences to start. There's also some markets are more segmented than others. Some like to do things a very specific way. So for example, if you think about Italy, right? They've been farming the same way for a very long time. And so there's a lot of different kinds of practices and beliefs, obviously different commodities and different product mixes. But all in all, I think the message of optimization and trying to get more yield and do a better job. And I've never met a single farmer, anybody in the chain that grew fruit from zero that wants to throw that stuff away, right?
Yep.
It's a tremendous amount of effort.
Having a farmer in my brother and my grandfather in the family, I can tell you that they would also be delighted with your mission, Katherine. And with that, I'd have to say just thanks very much. I really appreciate you joining the show. And let's talk, as you say, at the start of 2026 and see where you get.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.